First of all, welcome. My name is Josie Gaylord, and I am an advocate for bold climate action. I work with a team of amazing climate advocates who organized today's event. That team includes Actera, who I want to thank for hosting all of us today. So many of you were with us 3 weeks ago for the Code Red for Humanity webinar, where we all heard about the need for urgent climate action, as well as the solutions that are already available to us today for eliminating fossil fuel emissions. Now we're going to turn our attention to specific actions that concerned citizens can take to advance climate policies at the municipal level. We have 3 goals today. 1 is to introduce you to climate action plans. 2 is to give you a chance to engage, to teach you how to engage with your city officials. And 3 is to give you a chance to network with one another. Some of you may be experienced climate advocates. Others of you maybe haven't ever even attended a city council meeting or studied a REACH code. That's okay. You are all welcome and you're all in the right place. So now I would like to introduce Crystal Wickham, who serves on Sunnyvale's Sustainability Commission and helped shape the city's climate action plan, which they call their climate action playbook. Crystal's going to spend about 10 minutes walking us through the basics of climate action plans, including what to look for in a good CAP. Welcome, Crystal.
Thanks, everyone. Can see my slide?
Yep.
All right. So thank you all for coming. Second. I'll be going through why we need climate action plans, what they are, how they get made, what's in them, and what makes a good one. So first, the why. California has goals to reduce greenhouse gas emissions 40% compared to 1990 levels by 2030 and 80% by 2045. As we learned in the Code Red webinar, this is a massive undertaking, and at the same time, these goals are really insufficient compared to the need. The pie chart shows contributions by sector of greenhouse gas emissions for the whole state in 2019. Burning gasoline and diesel, which produces CO2 and other pollutants, makes up about 40% of the state's emissions. Burning natural gas primarily accounts for the emissions in the industrial sector, the remaining electric power that is not generated by renewables, nuclear or hydro, and the way we heat the space and water in our homes and businesses. In 2019, the state's emissions were about 3% below 1990 levels and 13% below the peak emissions in 2004. In order to meet the 2030 goal, the state will have to reduce its emissions by 4.3% each year from 2019 to 2030. This is more than double the year-over-year reductions seen in recent years. We likely met that goal in 2020 due to the pandemic, though we don't want to repeat the economic pain that caused. However, California has proven that it has decoupled economic growth from greenhouse gas emissions. From 2000 to 2019, the carbon intensity of California's economy decreased by 45%, even while the state's GDP increased by 63%. So it is possible to continue economic growth while we're at the same time reducing emissions. But we do need to work faster. The state recognizes that setting a goal is not enough. It needs the support of cities, businesses, industries, and individuals to meet those goals. Thus, the need for city climate action plans. So climate action plans, or CAPs for short, are written roadmaps outlining strategies and activities that a city will undertake to reduce its greenhouse gas emissions. They're based on a city's greenhouse gas inventory and focus on actions that can achieve the greatest emission reductions in a cost-effective way. Cities use the CAPs for making decisions and committing resources in alignment with other municipal goals. CAPs are not actually mandatory, but addressing climate change at the general plan level or with a CAP allows for a streamlined review of projects under the CEQA Act, which offers an advantage to cities with significant development. Most cities in the Bay Area have a CAP. Statewide, a 2019 report found that 64% of Californians live in a city covered by a CAP. So you can find and download your own city's CAP on their website. Check when it was last updated and find out if there have been progress on the actions that have been defined and any metrics. Some CAPs are long and cumbersome to read, while others are pretty well organized public-facing documents with a concise executive summary. And I have just 3 samples here on the right side of a small, medium, and large size city and how long their CAPs are. So there's quite a variation. As I mentioned, the greenhouse gas inventory is the basis and starting point for defining a CAP. Cities used to do this every few years, but increasingly they're doing it every year. The inventory covers all emissions from the community as well as the city operations, but it does not include emissions from purchasing products or food made outside the city. It doesn't include air travel or other transportation outside the city. So this example on the slide is fairly typical of Bay Area cities. Notice that 80 to 90% of emissions come from 2 big areas. The largest share is gasoline and diesel use for transportation. And the next largest is methane use in homes, businesses, and industry, which makes up about 34% of emissions in this example. Electricity emissions are down dramatically in most Bay Area cities due to the community choice energy model and their procurement of zero carbon energy. To reach carbon neutrality as soon as possible, city climate action plans must define how to shrink this pie, going from the left side to the right side. And they need to figure it out how to do it dramatically and quickly. The process to define and get a CAP adopted can vary from less than a year to many years. The leadership commitment of the council is really the key, and it starts the process. You can see in the center of the slide there. So with direction from council to create or update a CAP, staff will first prepare the greenhouse gas inventory. They might engage a consultant to assist, and they make a timeline for the project. There's multiple points where input is sought, and public participation can really have a significant impact on the final product. Often the first time for public engagement is when staff seeks guidance from council on the overarching goals for GHG reduction. There are then public workshops and surveys and drafts of the CAP published where commissions and the public provide input. Adoption by the council is usually a celebratory moment, but it represents really the point in time where the real work begins, the implementation and measurement of progress. Some of the actions defined in a CAP can be major policies or ordinances that themselves need a full process of planning, drafting, and public input. One example of this is the REACH codes for all electric new construction, which I'll mention in a later slide. Sometimes a CAP is adopted without the budgetary or staff support that is needed. And without citizen involvement at this stage, the plan could falter, get put on a shelf, or be deprioritized. And you can see this as a continuous cycle. So many Bay Area cities, having adopted a plan in the early to mid 2010s, are now either in the process of updating their plans or have done so within the last few years. So what are typical main elements in a CAP? They're often divided into sections that focus on strategic areas of greenhouse gas emission reduction. They don't all fall into these categories that I have shown. This is just an example, but most include focus areas for transportation and buildings because of where that's the majority of where the emissions are coming from. Some have detailed actions identified along with funding sources and required staffing to complete them. But others are more of a general framework of strategies that inform planning for detailed actions that come later. In this example, we have strategic areas focusing on clean electricity, decarbonizing buildings and transportation, the wise use of resources, community engagement, and adaptation to the changes that are already happening. So what makes a good climate action plan or a great climate action plan? These are some things that advocates believe make a strong plan. The state's 40% by 2030 target It's really insufficient, and some cities are stepping up with
Okay,
carbon
thanks.
neutrality goals by 2030. But those bold goals need to be supported by high impact actions, especially for buildings and transportation. Also, a knowledgeable and committed staff, some success metrics, and secure and sufficient budget. Cities can lead by committing to transition their own municipal assets to electric. Initial caps often did not include an adaptation plan, but cities are generally including them now when they do their updates. And lastly, involving citizens is critical, both to get the best ideas into action and because the actions of individuals and businesses are vital to success. And of course, the real measure of a good cap is whether it serves as an effective tool to drop emissions on a timescale consistent with the goals. Now I have a little diversion into REACH codes because they're very important for this year. As part of the CAP actions relating to building decarbonization, 53 cities in California have adopted REACH codes or gas bans that require new construction to be all electric. This has really been an effective tool to prevent new buildings, which last 30 to 50 years or more, from being built with methane gas infrastructure and systems. So REACH codes are city ordinances. They go beyond the state standards for buildings. But because the state standards are updated every 3 years, the city ordinances have to be readopted or else they lapse. So this year, many CCAs or community choice energy agencies and cities are working together to strengthen the previous REACH codes and perhaps include language relating to existing buildings. There is a community feedback webinar February 16th in the evening. It's going to be a great opportunity to engage and learn more. And we'll put the link to register for that in the chat if you're interested. And my last slide is about ways that cities are critical in supporting the state's climate goals. So cities really are uniquely suited to address their own local building codes, their permitting processes, and incentives that promote electrification and efficiency. They can work to eliminate emissions from their own operations, for example, with their vehicle fleet and their municipal buildings. They have a responsibility to address local climate change risks and create the adaptation plans. And they can engage and influence the residents and businesses. California cities can lead the way for other municipalities across the state and nation by sharing information like financing strategies, model ordinances, and incentive programs. And through their collective action, they are already influencing state policy. So that's where I'll end it. Please put your questions in the chat and we will have a little time for Q&A later in the hour or at the end. So thank you.
Thank you, Crystal. That was a great introduction to climate action plans. So now that we all know what a CAP is and how to advocate for a strong one, now that we all know what a CAP is, who do we talk to about it? How do we advocate for strong ones? So for that, we're going to turn to Dash Leeds, who is an expert in city level advocacy as a conservation assistant at the Loma Prieta chapter of the Sierra Club.
So hello, everyone. My name is Dasha Leeds. I'm the conservation assistant with the Sierra Club Loma Prieta chapter. I've been doing local government advocacy for about 3 years now. And it's my goal just to give you some really quick tips to help you get started. These are things I wish I knew when I went into it. And hopefully these will be very general tools that you can use for any sort of advocacy that you're interested in. So a couple things I wish I knew before I started. First is that you as a citizen have more power than you may realize, especially in local government. Oftentimes I would look at federal or international politics and it would all seem so big and overwhelming and untouchable that it was a barrier for me to get involved. But once I started to get involved locally in my own municipalities, I started to realize that things actually change when you put in the effort, even with just a small number of people. Next is you don't have to be an expert. I get imposter syndrome all the time. I've talked to a lot of other advocates. They get imposter syndrome. I think that's healthy. You don't have to be a PhD biologist to advocate to protect the environment, for example, but it's really good to consult PhD biologists and research for when you are trying to protect the environment. So you don't need to be an expert, you just hop right in there. And then that sort of leads into the next point, which is don't be afraid to ask for help. You know, if you know an expert, go ahead and ask that person. And I think as an advocate and being in the advocacy community, I've been really surprised at how willing people are to lend you a hand, to help teach you something, to bring you along in a process. So I'd say hop right in and don't be afraid of failure. And my last point, these two words, sort of like a mantra to me, is show up. And what I mean by this is I'm going to teach you the sort of government advocacy little basic tips to get started, but there are so many different ways you can show up. You can be an artist, you can do communications, you can just be someone who talks to your friends. You can be a frontline warrior. There are so many different ways that you can fight for what you believe in. I'm just showing you one pathway here. So if this clicks with you, great. But if not, I just want to say I really support operational unity across a variety of tactics. So just use your talents and express yourself in the way that feels most genuine and natural to you. And I think you'll be a great advocate for whatever you believe in. So getting started, I think finding other people who are interested in the same things as you is a really good starting point. And then if you do find a small group or maybe even just one other person, just doing some basic research on your topic so that you have a general idea of the kind of field that you're in. It can really help to, in that research, consult subject matter experts. And in terms of advocacy, look for mentors, look for someone maybe who's already spoken in city council meetings, who can take you under their wing. And once you've done all this, you can start brainstorming to sort of form a big picture goal, like what do I want to accomplish in my city this year? So I'll talk about some pressure points here. The structure of local government consists of basically three main pressure points that I want to talk about. The first is the city council, or for county government, it's the board of supervisors. These are the main decision makers. They vote on laws, they give directions to city staff. They are basically the end all be all for your local municipality. If you want to accomplish something, you're going to need a majority vote in that body to accomplish it. So the in-between are commissions and committees. These are often appointed, sometimes elected positions. These review policies and they make recommendations to the city council or board of supervisors and staff. A lot of times before an ordinance makes its way to the final votes, it'll go through a couple commissions and committees for review. So intervening in that process to influence the committee recommendations can be really powerful in shaping the final outcome of the policy you're looking at. And then finally is staff. And last but not least with staff, they're highly important, especially the consultants too that are working along with them. They're the ones actually writing the laws. They're hosting public feedback meetings. They're taking direction from the above entities. They're incorporating public comments. They're the ones making the thing that you're advocating about or implementing the program. So influencing staff, giving them, the research you have, developing a relationship with them can go a long way in actually getting what you want to see included in a law or in a program. And for all of these commissions, committees, councils, I would say always look to find a champion. Even if it's just one person, you're going to want someone in these bodies that is going to be able to stand up for the issue that you believe in. And on council, it's particularly important to have a champion because they can put your item on the agenda. They can defend your item if it's questioned by other council members. So I think it's really important to try to find people internally in the government that are of the same mind of you, or at least have the same goal as you on a particular issue. So I'm going to jump away from my PowerPoint here, and I'm going to show you what it's like to actually find an agenda document. If you take away anything from this presentation, I would say hopefully you learn how to find an agenda online, because this is critical to not only joining a city council meeting, figuring out when to speak, but also planning for ahead what you want to do in the meeting. Okay, so let's see here. What I usually do is I will Google X city council agenda. So like city of Sunnyvale city council agenda. And usually you'll get to a page like this. Almost every city or municipality has a legislar page that looks very similar to this. Here's where all the agendas are for all of the different bodies. So I'm going to scroll down here. You can see it says all meetings. One thing that's really important here are these drop-down menus. You can select the scope of time that you're looking at, and you can also select the body that you want to look at. So here I have City Council selected, but you could find the Parks and Recreation Commission. You could search for just Sustainability Commission meetings. But here I have City Council. You can see the dates, the times, and critically here are these links here, the meeting details and agenda. So that's where you'll find the documents, and I've already sort of pre-downloaded these here, so I don't have to load them in. If you were to click the meeting details link, you get a digital version of the agenda. So here's all the different agenda items. These links here actually link to each specific agenda item, and they include all the sort of details about only that specific item. So let's click on one just to see what it looks like. So here's that ordinance that's going to be introduced. Sometimes there's a lot of staff information written here. Sometimes it's very small, and you can see an actual link to the ordinance here. So you could actually read the law that was being introduced if you want. And so next here, if you were to click the PDF link to the agenda, you would get this document, and then this is what you're looking for. So again, going back to the original page I was on, this link here will take you to the PDF agenda. So critically, the agenda at the top usually contains the Zoom link to join. It contains some instructions. And there's a couple points in here that I want to point out just in terms of navigating this. So they do flow top to bottom. So an agenda item close to the top will be towards the start of the meeting. Sometimes if the city's nice, they'll include time estimates, which I always really appreciate. So I want to point out a couple of specific items that are really important. First is the consent calendar. These items here, so 1A, 1B, 1C, they're actually all bundled together in what's called the consent calendar, and they're voted on all at once with a single vote with no discussion. Now, a city council member and occasionally members of the public can pull an item from consent. They can request to pull that item off of that process and discuss it individually as a regular part of the agenda. So in terms of planning for a meeting, if you see a super long consent calendar, that doesn't mean that you're going to have to necessarily wait a lot of time unless a bunch of items are pulled off of that calendar. Usually the consent calendar goes very quickly. So let's see here. You're also going to want to find what is called public hearing or general business. Sometimes it's called verbal, here we go, oral communications. This is what I'm looking for. Right before the consent calendar, usually towards the beginning of the meeting. Sometimes this is called public comment. Sometimes it's called verbal communications, depending on the jurisdiction. This is where you can talk about any issue that is not on the agenda. Usually, if you have to speak during a city council meeting, it has to be relevant to the specific agenda item. And each agenda item has its own predetermined window for public comment. But let's say you want to bring something up to a city that they're not doing or considering. This is the agenda item that you're looking for. You can talk about anything you want here. It's just that the city council cannot take action that day on whatever you bring up, but this is how you want to introduce your issues to the city council. So yeah, that's navigating agendas. Agendas are absolutely critical to planning for what you want to talk about, because you want to know what the city's actually going to be voting on to be able to plan how to influence that. So again, your specific goal for a meeting should be directed at the proper entity, presented at the proper time on the agenda, and it should be clear and specific and relevant to the agenda. So yeah, you have your goal, you've downloaded the agenda, you know what's coming up in that city council meeting in a few days. What can you do before then? Well, you can brief your fellow advocates. You can write letters to elected officials and staff people. I highly recommend trying to arrange meetings with elected officials and staff people. I think that's absolutely critical to influencing them ahead of time. You can educate your community members. You can do this by writing letters to the editor or op-eds. And then when it actually comes time for the meeting, delivering a public comment at the meeting itself. And that's extremely important. I've seen public comments change the course of an agenda item. I've seen council members flip their votes before and after public comments. They can be highly, highly effective. You're usually going to get 3 minutes to speak, but plan on that getting reduced if there's a lot of people speaking on the same agenda item. Generally, preparing a 2-minute public comment is a safe bet. If you're feeling nervous about public speaking or speaking in front of elected officials, I mean, they're humans just like us, they're regular people, especially if you talk with them ahead of the meeting. I think it really eases that. But being nervous is actually an advantage. If you are, on the digital podium, so to speak, and you're stumbling over your words, you're sort of shaking or not speaking well, that shows commitment. And I think elected officials can really notice that. And I've seen, elected officials who maybe they're kind of not paying attention, and then someone goes up there and is, struggling, clearly struggling, and they perk up and they're like, oh, who is this person who's overcoming this adversity to speak to me? So again, with your public comments, try and be clear, specific, relevant, and personal anecdotes are always great. Highly recommend those. And so I want to cover the meetings with elected officials and staff. If you choose to arrange those, I do highly recommend it. It builds a positive relationship, which can help you in future advocacy projects. A lot of times you can find out useful information, particularly if you're meeting with staff people. They usually have a ton of information about whatever projects they're working on. You can find out about all of the upcoming meetings you'll need to attend, potentially even before they go on the city website. If you Google Joe Simidian's 13 tips for successful advocacy, you can find a document written by an elected official, Santa Clara County Supervisor Joe Simidian, and this is sort of his tips for advocacy. And there's a lot of great procedural tips for meeting with elected officials in this document. So just, write that down in your notes. And usually meetings with elected officials last about 30 minutes. So they're very short. You're going to have to plan ahead, send them an agenda of what you want to talk about ahead of time, because it can be very easy to get sidetracked, and then all of a sudden you're only on agenda item 2 of your agenda and it's 4 minutes left in the meeting. And lastly, and critically important here, is you're going to want to find a champion to fight for your issue within government. That goes a long way. So here's the loop that I sort of find myself in as an advocate. I'll find out about a meeting. I'll look at the agenda and understand what I'm going up against. I'll do all the pre-meeting advocacy steps of writing letters, trying to meet with officials and staff to discuss the topic. I'll then attend the meeting, give my public comments. I'll take notes on the outcome and debrief my fellow advocates, and then we find out about the next meeting. And that's generally how we do it. So just revisiting some general tips before we close out here. Be persistent and vocal, no matter how you choose to fight for what you believe in. Advocacy is about making yourself heard. Learn from other advocates. And if you have experience, I think you have an obligation in this role to teach other advocates. I highly recommend just taking one person. Don't do what I'm doing and start with like 90 people. I mean, you can if you want to, that's great. But I think some of the most effective ways to teach people is to find like maybe 1 or 2 people, take them under your wing, bring them virtually to a city council meeting with you, answer all their questions, and get them started. And if it clicks with them, I think you may have just created a lifelong advocate. Don't be afraid of failing, learn from your mistakes, and again, recognize your own power. I think especially with local municipalities, you have more power to influence government than you may realize. So thank you so much. Here is my email. I think we'll be doing Q&A at the end of this, so there won't be any now, but feel free to put questions in the chat. I'll be taking a look at that, and feel free to shoot me an email if you have questions or thoughts on anything. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dash. That was wonderful. Dash is so good at this, and we're just delighted that he was able to share all of his insights into being a good advocate. Okay, so now we thought it would be helpful for you to hear from 3 volunteers who just got involved in climate advocacy. We will start with Michelle Hudson, who is from San Mateo. Welcome, Michelle.
Thanks, Josie. As Josie said, my name is Michelle. I live in San Mateo, and I'm a working mom with 2 school-age kids. I first got involved with climate advocacy this past fall after feeling deeply concerned about the climate for a long time without ever having done anything about it. The problem for me was that I had no idea what to do about it. The final straw that pushed me into action was the latest IPCC report. When that report's code red warning came out, I knew I couldn't sit on the sidelines any longer. So I took the first steps of contacting several local climate organizations and offering to volunteer. The first one that responded to me was 350 Silicon Valley. When I spoke to their volunteer coordinator, Cheryl, I was extremely nervous that she would turn me away for having zero knowledge or skills in climate advocacy. But Cheryl assured me that the #1 qualification for being a climate advocate was having a desire to act, which I definitely had. I then launched into information gathering mode. Very quickly, I learned the good news that cities can have a major impact in fighting climate change through various policy tools. But unfortunately, there was no climate action team or organization in my city. So I decided to start one. My next steps very much followed the Climate Action 101 playbook that will be shared with you today. First, I was introduced to one experienced advocate in my city. Then that led to a bunch of other introductions, including to city council members and sustainability commissioners who were on our side. We had our starting coalition. And shortly after that, we had our first win. It started with my team's letter writing campaign to city council before their annual goal setting meeting. Boiled down, our letter simply asked the city council to prioritize bold climate action in 2022. Then before the city council meeting, we saw that the mayor had added an extremely bold climate proposal for the city, which was to establish policies to decarbonize buildings and infrastructure and eliminate methane gas use by 2030. Wow, talk about bold. But it wouldn't go anywhere unless 3 out of 5 city council members voted in favor of advancing it. Our team quickly mobilized to make public comments in favor of the mayor's proposal at the city council meeting, and we had an impressive show of support. In the end, all our work paid off. The city council voted 3-2 to move forward with the mayor's proposal. It was a narrow win, but it was a win. We now have an uphill battle to turn the mayor's proposal into law, but I'm optimistic and I'm encouraged by knowing that there are so many supportive advocates and organizations ready, willing, and able to help with whatever my team needs. And there are so many people in my city who are climate concerned, but like me before, don't know what to do. They just need to know. So now we need to show them. Thanks for listening. And now it's my pleasure to introduce Mark Hofberg from Palo Alto.
Okay. Thank you, Michelle. I want to state up front that good friends were essential to my becoming a climate activist. I'm a retired physicist with grandkids and I live in Palo Alto. In the fall of 2019, a good friend of mine, Bert, was doing great work in a program called Carbon Free Palo Alto. I wanted to work on climate issues as he was doing, but I wasn't sure how to engage. He suggested I write a letter to the city council supporting an ordinance banning methane in new building construction. I remember crafting that letter and sending it, and that was my first step as an activist. Turns out the city council enacted that ordinance. Why? Because there were many people like me who wrote letters and spoke out at the council meeting. I was amazed. So with more conviction, I wondered what other things could I do? Ideas percolated in my head for more than a year. This past August, I jumped in with both feet. I joined local groups like 350 Silicon Valley and the Sierra Club to get concrete ideas. I got immediate feedback from them identifying internal teams I might wish to join. I attended meetings of many different teams to get a sense of where I might best contribute. I knew I had to focus down, but I still wasn't sure where. Finally, after brainstorming with Bert and another mutual good friend, Sandra, we identified a need for more effective communication with the vice mayor of Palo Alto, a guy named Bert. Of all the city council members, Pat was the most focused on climate action. Given my science, corporate, and research background, perhaps I could work as a sounding board for him and also present options like those my activist friends were working on. Perhaps I could accelerate the climate agenda, advocating for specific priorities. So I wrote Pat, suggesting how I might help ease his escalating workload caused by the increasing urgency of the climate crisis. Surprisingly, he invited me to meet with him over coffee. Fast forward a few months, Pat and I now meet and consult several times a week. I push back hard on some of his ideas, heartily support others, and give my reasons as clearly as I can. We both appreciate the give and take. I have no formal title or official role, and I like that. I can suggest ideas about accelerating the pace of change in all kinds of ways, argue their benefits, hear his reactions, and take the issues back to climate activist groups for rethinking. I'm part of the dialogue he has with others in coming to decisions, and I found this a productive way to affect change at the city level. So let's circle back to the beginning of my story. Good friends got me started as a climate activist, and along my path, I've been honored to meet many talented, resourceful, wise people who have helped and inspired me. Many are here today, and I know such people will inspire you too, as you make your own moves to get involved. So thanks for listening to my story. I'd like to introduce now John McKenna of Menlo Park to you. John?
Thank you, Michelle and Mark, for sharing your stories. The advocacy that you've both done in a short amount of time is very impressive. Hello, my name is John McKenna, and this is my advocacy journey. Every individual matters. Every individual has a role to play. Every individual makes a difference. I first saw Dr. Jane Goodall's words last summer in Bend, Oregon, posted on my friend's refrigerator. My 7-year-old daughter, Madeline, and I were in Bend for a week to visit my high school friend and his family. Our visit was wonderful, but my experience was dampened by the weather. Every day was well over 90 degrees, and we stayed indoors for 2 days due to bad air quality from a nearby wildfire. The weather during previous visits had never been so uninviting. For several years, I've known and worried about climate change. Our trip to Bend was a tipping point for me. After our visit, inspired by Dr. Goodall's quote, I read some of her books and searched for opportunities to advocate for action to address the climate crisis. After seeing a post on Nextdoor about signing a letter to push cities to take action against climate change, I signed the letter and was put in contact with a local activist. Cheryl reached out to me and we had a wonderful Zoom conversation. We shared our concerns, our feelings, and our motivations. Cheryl then introduced me to a local group and I was off and running, more like crawling. Admittedly, I didn't know what I was doing or what, if any, value I could bring to the group. But the leaders of the group, Josie and Crystal, and all of its members have been wonderful every step of the way. They're patient with newcomers, they educate, they listen, and they welcome new ideas. When a group of individuals care so deeply about something and each other, the support of the group empowers each individual to take action, which, no matter how big or small, can truly make a difference. The small act of placing a phone call is one example. I simply called one of my Menlo Park council members and extended a personal invitation to the recent Code Red webinar. I later learned that my call not only motivated them to attend, but they were so impressed by the event that they've made a commitment to support net zero legislation. When an elected official hears the voice of one of their constituents, it carries a lot more weight than you might expect. Another meaningful act is to talk with friends, family members, and coworkers. These conversations can be uncomfortable at times, but they are important, and one conversation can lead to 1,000. Often, you'll find that people have similar concerns and want to make a difference, but just don't know what to do or where to start. As we talk more openly about climate change, momentum will build to accelerate the much-needed transition to clean energy. I was initially motivated to take action because I feared what the future might be like for my daughter and for all living things that make our planet so beautiful and amazing. I still have those fears, but the more I read, the more I learn, and the more I act, my fears are mitigated by hope for a brighter future, a clean future in which we can enjoy the many benefits of no longer emitting greenhouse gases, a future created by the small acts of many individuals that led to positive change. Once I took the initial leap of getting involved, I have found that I want to do more. Taking action is the best thing you can do for others and for yourself. It has made an incredible difference in my life, and I'm so grateful for my wonderful new friends and fellow climate warriors that welcomed me into their group. We have so much to do. It's really going to take all of us. So I wholeheartedly encourage you to get involved. I promise it will make a difference. Back to Josie.
Thank you so much, John, Mark, and Michelle. Your stories are so inspiring. It's just wonderful to hear from new folks like you.